Okay, so for our main topic today, we've gotten some questions recently that are questions we've gotten before in the past, and then we've answered, okay?
My word.
And so one of the things, and this was, Ryan, this was your idea, so I got to give you the credit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
You're welcome.
So why don't we start reacting to old episodes, see if our views have changed at all, okay?
Theology Thursday reacts.
Theology Thursday reacts to Theology Thursday. So we're going to do that today because what I'd been doing when people, I was just like, oh, I already answered that. Here's the episode link. And sometimes I might still do that, especially if it was recent.
Yeah.
But if somebody asks a question and it's one we haven't visited in a while, then maybe we have something we could add to the conversation, something that's changed.
Well, and here's the thing. Like, I think we've been doing this for, 3 years now?
Yeah.
And,
It's 120 episodes.
our opinions on certain things have changed over that time.
Some of them drastically.
So, definitely, I think...
No, it's kind of terrifying that there's this many hours of content out there. It's going to cost me a job someday, but we're having a good time. It
was all worth it.
This is Katie's question. Why did God allow humans to sin in the beginning in the Garden of Eden and create us as sinful creatures when he knew we would reject him to make a plan to allow us to accept him all over again through Jesus' sacrifice? So a couple things. One, he didn't create us as sinful creatures. I think Katie recognizes that. I think it's just poorly worded because he didn't create us as sinful creatures. He created us as good creatures with free will who, sin entered the picture later, right? But it's that old question of, why put the tree there in the first place? Why even give them the option to sin? And so we're going to look at an episode we did on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This actually came out in February, so it wasn't terribly long ago. And I kind of thought maybe not react to this one, but then y'all were like, I don't even remember what I said. Let's watch it again.
I'm kind of curious.
Because it's mainly you two that talked on this episode. So at any point, if you want to pause and respond to something specific, please do. And also recognize we're going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to edit it later. Yeah. So, if there's long chunks of us watching and not saying anything, don't worry. I'm going to trim it down and make it something concise. So this is new for us, but it's going to be fun. I'm sorry, Johnny, that the lights are going directly in your eyes.
It's okay, and I'm sorry that I'm so big in this episode.
Yeah. I'm excited to have that.
You are a substantial man in this one.
I don't know what happened.
I think it's just your posture. You're slouched.
I think so.
And your head just
rub his little
sits
tummy
on top of your tummy.
It's much better that we have the studio now. See, I told you guys we've improved. All right. And plus, look at, I love how each mic stand's different. This one's the straight up one. This one's the boom stand. This one had this weird little bendy thing.
One thing I will critique about me right away is I'm glad that my beard care and haircut has gotten better.
Much better. Yeah. I'm glad too. There's certain things that they just take time.
Why did God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden when he knew Adam and Eve would sin? The age-old question.
Yeah, and it's a fair question. I think a lot of people at some point ask that question as they're kind of putting together the biblical narrative is okay, God is sovereign, God is all-knowing, and he gave them free will and put them in the garden with, with this tree and the ability to make this decision. Why would he do that?
And don't forget, it's a misnomer, apparently, that Calvinists don't believe in free will.
We do believe in free will.
Johnny,
but that's a discussion for a different time.
Okay, so you're in agreement that God gave Adam and Eve a choice whether or not to eat from that tree.
Yes. They had the ability to choose to sin or to choose to not to sin. That's a whole philosophical discussion for a different time, though.
But ultimately, we agree on that statement as it stands. Maybe the nuances of that statement.
There's lots of nuance there.
Oh, there's tons of nuance. There's tons of nuance about this question. Yeah.
I think actually, my answer probably is different. It might be different.
I think it is different because we alluded to this question at some point. I had said kind of my 3-word or 1-sentence take on it, and you're like, I want to hear more about that. I don't know about that. So I'm ready whenever. Whoever wants to go first.
I don't want to go first.
I'm pretty excited about it. Do you want to share your bit? Or?
I want you to go first.
Yay! Okay.
I'm here to see you guys fight each other.
Cringe.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna fight each other.
That's what the audience wants to watch too.
I think maybe we're just gonna come at it from different. It's kind of like if you're
just go ahead and share your view.
You ever seen the movie Vantage Point? Never mind. All right. All right. So, here's the thing. The tree it has kind of a multifaceted purpose. I must say that first.
Mhm.
Okay, Adam and Eve are called in the beginning, right, to rule the world. When it basically, I mean, it's you're supposed to have dominion. Basically, God was preparing Adam and Eve to take care of, to tend to the world, to really do all the things that we've done, just in a worse way. Build cultures, build communities, cultivate the earth, right? So he calls these to rule the world. Ironically, one of the Hebrew words used, he kind of refers to them as children. And I'm really butchering this and like going through it fast. We could get more in depth in like the actual Hebrew words and stuff like that. But he basically, the Hebrew word in Genesis kind of denotes that they're learners, they're children, they're under the direction of Yahweh, And so God walks with them. This is clear later on when like he's coming through the garden, during a certain time of the day, So he's with them on a regular basis. That's also implied in the text. And so the connotation, when you look at it, especially if you start to pull out your lexicon and start to parse some of the original language, the Hebrew connotation is that God is going to teach them good and bad, right and wrong, as they take on the mantle of ruling.
Mhm.
Right? This is kind of
This is something that God would teach them through this.
right. Exactly. God would over time teach them right and wrong, good and bad. This is heavily implied in the text, and so that they can rule. And so the question becomes, well, then why the tree? Right? God's showing them good and evil. The tree is a challenge. Are you going to take wisdom from me, the source, God, Yahweh? Are you going to learn from me? Are you going to try to seize wisdom for yourself? And so that's really how, through reading different scholarship and stuff like that, how I've come to understand the tree. That it was really a challenge. Are you going to seize wisdom for yourself? Are you going to allow God to teach you in time what it truly is? It was really a question.
Yeah.
Do you trust me? Do you love me?
And so far up to this point, I'm in perfect agreement with
Okay.
everything that you've said.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
Are you guys still in perfect agreement with everything you've said and agreed with?
So far, yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's important too. Like that question of, do you love me? Do you trust me? Like that was really the implication of the whole tree and the whole scenario.
Sure.
That was the purpose.
Yeah.
The question for me becomes, but if God foresaw that they would be deceived, right, then why the tree?
There
if God foresaw that, why the tree?
Probably
And
speaking
my
that point.
answer, looking at the unified story that leads to Jesus, is love. The tree was placed in the garden because of love. If you look at the narrative, right,
Sounds
considering
kinda mushy.
good and evil on your own, it's actually morally innocuous. Like considering it, trying to weigh what is good and what is evil. That was within their earthly rights. Look at the text. Eve considers the idea that the tree is desirable, right? She still hasn't sinned yet. She just looks at it and says, that's a shortcut.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, so she's considering, maybe, is it wiser for me to seize wisdom a little bit quicker? Jump the gun? But she doesn't sin until she makes the statement by taking from the tree, which is why a tangible thing was necessary. A device for tangible obedience and trust, which ultimately is love in action, right, is necessary for love. We know this to be true, right? There's a tangible, we make covenants of love, we make standards around love, even in relationships. It's like, there's this idea of like cheating on another person and stuff like that. We create tangible ways of showing our submission, our obedience to one another in order to communicate love.
Yeah, I think I definitely still stand by this. And I first actually heard this from my grandfather, and it stuck with me. The idea that the tree was put in the garden for the sake of love, and it didn't. I guess it didn't have to be a tree specifically, but that idea that it had to be something tangible. That they either, the significance of the tree is actually something else in Scripture, and there's a reason why it's a tree, but the main purpose is the device of like tangible, actionable obedience. And the reason is, if you look at the greatest commandment in Scripture, the Hebrew word for love is both a verb and a noun. And we talk about that in Christianity. It's like love is not just a feeling; it's an action. And it's like, but like it's like so true, like in the original text, that it's both and and you can't have one without the other. And so that's why there had to be a commandment involved.
Yeah. So, because the typical answer has to do, and I think y'all addressed this a little bit later in this episode we're reacting to, but is sort of the free will argument that we're not all just robots. But it really goes a lot deeper than that. It is about a relationship.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
God,
Yeah.
There are usually tangible things that you can do or not do which communicate that you are in a love relationship. And so the tree was a necessary device. My question, after kind of seeing all of that come together in the narrative, isn't why did God put it in there, but why did God go through with it? Because he knew the tree was necessary for love, but he knew they would fail to love him. Right? So he knows that this is necessary in order to create this environment where he can have a love relationship with his creation, but he also knew what it would cost him. And he did it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which we often relate to, and rightly so, you said it's a fair question. We often relate it to, well, was that really the wisest thing? Ironically, the same thing that Adam and Eve were doing, right, with the tree. Is that really the wisest thing? It's actually one of God's greatest expressions of love. Because in his omnipotence, that a love relationship with his creation, he, even though he knew that, he basically stated it was worth the consequences of our failure, to do that.
I just think it's interesting how in that too, this is kind of a separate thing, but I'm just noting how the tree really and their decision with it really reflects the essence of sin in the first place, is that sin almost always boils down to us wanting to take control, us wanting to have authority.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes sin comes from a God-given desire being perverted
Right.
into our own timing and our own way of doing it.
And if you really think about the whole narrative, it's really, really good. Like, there's so much packed in that in that narrative. But when you think about it, like, even as believers, right? Paul very explicit with the fact that we're going to still struggle with sin as believers, right? When do we struggle with sin the most? It's when we neglect our relationship with the Lord. They were given this opportunity. Did God really say? They could have clarified with God. He was coming to walk through the garden a little bit later, right? I mean, they could have waited and invested in their relationship with Yahweh and said, God, I'm considering this. What do you think is wise? They could have asked him what his standard was. And oftentimes our biggest mistake is not pausing to consider what God would have us do in a situation of temptation. And so...
That was a good application, Johnny.
Thanks, buddy.
You
Good
brought it
application.
back around.
I think one caveat that I'd make to what I said is the idea of the sin often being related to us wanting to take authority and control. I think just a clarification there is like that's us wanting to take God's place of authority
Right.
and control, because really, I mean, the mandate for humanity is to take dominion and
Yeah, I know
have
what you
authority
mean.
and create and cultivate. And so I can see how, like, that sentence by itself without that clarifier, like, no, we are supposed to take authority, over what God's given us, but it's like trying to take God's place is where that becomes an issue.
It seems like my thesis statement, which is probably still true today, is that God allowed for the possibility of sin because he believed love was worth it.
Yeah. Ryan's about to offer a counterpoint.
kind of faced with the same question, right? We're reeling with the fallout of the consequences of them eating the tree, and God is calling us back to a place where we trust Him.
They ate the whole
that,
tree?
That His plan
Yeah.
is good, that His plan is wise. the
Still
tree of
stand by
knowledge
that
of
to
good and
this
evil is wise. It's the same choice all over again. When we have some of these questions, they're totally fair, but at the end of the day, I think that the tree of knowledge of good and evil was that's why love exists. So.
Aww.
Ryan.
So I think I agree mostly with everything you said. The way I answered the question, I answered the question from a different angle.
I don't remember what I
think
said.
so. I do have a different answer than you. But when I thought about this,
You don't believe in love.
I have found
I'm a cold,
this
heartless
question comes
man.
up with a lot of people as like a philosophical question, Why did God do this or whatnot? I find that I am very unsatisfied with a lot of the answers that people give. And the biggest answer that I hear in response to this question
Here it
is God did this. God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden so that we can have free will to choose good and evil.
And before we continue, I'm interested because I don't remember what you said, but I do remember that you brought that up, that you weren't satisfied with that answer. And actually somebody responded to Katie's comment on Facebook with that exact answer. Well, it was about free will. So we're not all robots.
Yeah.
And you kind of say here, that's not enough for me. I'm not satisfied with that answer. So no knock on, I don't even remember who responded to Katie's response, but let's just look at it from a different angle here.
Yeah. And the reason why God would do that is so that we wouldn't be robots. I don't like that answer. I do affirm free will as a Calvinist. Even as a Calvinists do affirm free will to a certain sense. And even at in the garden, we
have to define our terms there.
The freest will, to choose evil, to choose good. But I don't think that was the purpose behind the tree. And maybe Johnny does disagree with me there. And the way I think about it, is in heaven, do we lose free will? Are we robots in heaven? When we go to heaven, we will not be able to sin. It will not be a part of our nature, but does that make us robots?
Yes.
I don't think so. I think we are allowed to express love. I think that's what we're going to be doing all the time in heaven, is expressing our love to God in heaven, even though we're not even able to sin in heaven. But that doesn't take our free will away, and that does not take our autonomy away. So I don't find that answer satisfying. And maybe my answer is even more simple than what Johnny said. Ultimately, why did God, knowing that Adam and Eve were going to eat from the tree, why did God not intervene? And ultimately, I have to affirm, and this is from a Reformed perspective, mind you, that God did not intervene because God actually had this all planned out from the beginning. That this was actually all part of God's plan. That answer is scary to a lot of people, and I can understand why, because it makes it sound like God ordained evil. And, well, I believe in a sovereign God, and I have to affirm that.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's address my comment here.
Okay.
I would probably use different words to describe that, because whether you're a Calvinist or you stopped recording.
No, I know. I don't need the screen anymore. I just realized it's going to take up a bunch of space for no reason. So keep going.
Whether you're a Calvinist or you're an Arminian, you still have to confront the same problem, right? That God is sovereign, right? And God does have, there is God's plan, God's plan, right. But, how much of it, there's nothing that happens in this world that surprises God, right? Whether you believe that it's because of foreknowledge or because of he ordained it, nothing surprises God. Nothing takes God back. It's like, whoa, I was not expecting that to happen. So yeah, even Adam and Eve taking the fruit. So, I mean, in theological terms, I think there's a distinction between saying that God ordained something or God allowed it to happen. Either way, God knew it was going to happen, So I still agree with younger Ryan there, but I would be a little more hesitant to articulate it like that, because it definitely makes God sound like the author of evil.
Do you believe that God ordained Adam and Eve to sin?
Yeah, and I think we'd have to talk about what ordaining means. At the very least, from what I know, God allowed Adam and Eve to sin.
Yeah, I mean that's where I'm at. I believe in the whole foreknowledge thing. You can think of like a Doctor Strange scenario. Imagine God's planning the universe. He knows everything that's going to happen, and he decides to set into motion something that's going to play out a certain way, and he knows how he's going to.
And think about it. Even with that analogy, Doctor Strange knew he had to allow half the universe to get snapped away ultimately for everyone to get saved.
Right. So, Yeah, exactly. So sometimes you have to make some tough decisions.
I mean, it might be a little bit of a stretch, but I was just saying you could take that analogy even further.
I think it's a pretty good.
Here's the thing with younger Ryan here. Younger Ryan's a little more confident in his position. These days I'm not as confident.
And now you're agnostic,
right? I'm
about
agnostic.
everything.
I'm actually Buddhist now, but I would say I think I still believe that, with probably modifying some of the language that I use. But I'm much less confident about what I'm saying here.
Well, let's see what confident Ryan has to say to
Buddhist
Ryan.
I would just say, I'm probably in the same exact boat I was in then. I mean, the reality is, I believe that God
hasn't changed because he's perfect.
No, I know, but God had this plan for the universe. He knew what it was going to cost him. He knew what we were going to do, and he just that's how, because God is love. He just went through with it. It was awesome.
Johnny's living in a Disney movie.
He's a little touchy-feely.
That pattern in Scripture as well. We think about the big example that people would give is the story of Joseph. What happens to Joseph in Genesis? He's sold into slavery by his brothers. They really don't like him. They're jealous of him, and so they sold him. They beat him up. They threw him in a hole, and then they sold him into slavery.
One in this video.
And Joseph goes through all of this crap on his journey, and he ends up in prison. And it's a whole story. You should read it. It's a great story. But ultimately, through these events, Joseph he ascends to the second highest office in Egypt through these events, and finally Joseph, he actually reconciles with his brothers through a series of events, and he says this in Genesis 50. He says to his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." So Joseph's brothers sold Joseph into slavery, but here Joseph recognizes that it was God's plan all along.
God's plan.
So who caused Joseph to be sold into slavery? Was it Joseph or was it God? The answer is both. What we see in Scripture is that God uses secondary agents to do His will.
I used the word cause there, and I mean, I'm not a theologian nor am I a philosopher, but yeah, we have to be careful when we're using that language that God caused something. So,
okay,
that's it. That's my comment.
Okay.
Another example I would give is in 2 Samuel chapter 24. My pastor recently preached on this text. King David, he's king at the time, and he decides to take a census, and this was actually a sin for David to take a census, and that's really weird for us to hear. Why is it wrong for David to count his army? And so scholars have talked about that, and many scholars have come to the conclusion that it was sinful for David to take a census of his army because of David's intention. He was probably taking a census so that he could go forth with imperial unjust war against neighboring kingdoms, which would not have been good. And so that was kind of the heart behind David's actions there in taking the census. But verse 1 of chapter 24 in 2 Samuel says this: "Again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, 'Go number Israel and Judah.'" That's a wild verse right there. That verse tells us that God incited David to take the census, something that God didn't want David to do, that God deemed sinful for David. We read in another passage, though, in a different book, the same story. 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 1 through 2. It reads this: "Then Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. So David said to Joab and the commanders of the army, 'Go number Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring me a report that I may know their number.'" So in 1 Chronicles, it tells us that actually it was Satan that incited David to take this census. And what's the conclusion that we make there is, who was it? Was it God or David? Or was it God or Satan? And the answer, it was both. God actually uses Satan for the purposes of his will. And another story we could look at is Job, whatever, The reality is that God has ordained everything. I affirm God's sovereignty. Why would God ordain these things? And ultimately, it is because it is for His glory. I have to say, through the sum of Scripture, from Genesis to Revelation, everything that God does is for His glory, and that includes the death of Jesus on the cross, and that whole plan of redemption. It is about love, and God expressing His love for His people also magnifies His glory. All of it's for His glory.
Yeah.
And so I do agree with Johnny.
I still agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in a way I agree with that. With my whole love angle that you guys.
Yeah, your
make
Disney
fun.
movie angle.
Yeah,
You don't care about God's glory.
No, I do.
'Cause
I
you're
think
just
that
a lovey mamby-pamby.
No, I think that is His glory. I mean,
Yeah.
right? That's what incites me to.
But
worship.
isn't that what he just said? So
Right,
why would you
yeah,
disagree with him?
and Johnny's right. His love is His glory. I mean, the Bible says that God is love.
Right.
You know?
So when I think about the kind of like the way that I would frame it, I would then agree with Ryan from that framing of like, yeah, God does everything for His glory.
It seems to me like, honestly, you guys both agree. You just have different emphasis.
Well, I think now, and this would be like a whole other episode, like the whole idea of the whole like Satan God dichotomy and all those kind of things, I would have a totally different take on than Ryan does. But
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah, I
think
know.
could get
Yeah,
into that
he's
right now.
weird. Like, yeah, he believes
So that's
weird things, yeah.
a whole nother episode, huh?
Yeah, that was the time period between the two different accounts was enough that basically the second was self-corrective, but that's a whole different thing.
Oh, okay. Interesting. We'll have to do an episode on that.
That in the garden, we do see this. I think love is definitely a part of it.
Just a part of it.
But I think in
Just
like
like God,
the big picture,
love is a part of God.
I think it's about God's
that
glory.
was heretical. God is love.
Maybe you agree with me or disagree with me.
I do. I do agree with you. I mean, I think that was kind of my point. Is like, I certainly don't believe that first theory that is a common answer, right?
Yeah.
That the tree of knowledge of good and evil was placed there so that we would not be robots. They already weren't robots. He was already considering and weighing good against evil. Yeah, as she was being trained by God to do so, right? Okay, so she had free will already. It was a device for tangible obedience, which created the possibility of love. And I think I've been asked that question before by students. It's like, okay, well now sin will one day be completely removed. Okay, that possibility is now removed. Does that mean that we are robots? That we've lost our free will? Well, there's a big difference at that point. When we enter into the new kingdom, when God finishes the work that He's doing in us, Habakkuk has a prophecy that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God. Interesting, like you're talking about the glory of God, as the waters cover the sea. That there won't be any absence of understanding good and evil and weighing God. Like we will know God's wisdom. It will be been revealed to us in fullness. And so we won't have anything, we won't need to weigh any options. We will know what's true and what's right of our own accord. Because we've chosen through faith, but there just won't be any room for it anymore because the knowledge of the glory of God will cover as the waters cover the sea, and so that's the main difference. Not necessarily that we don't have free will, but that there's no room to push that free will into evil anymore. And but yeah, I totally agree that was not the main purpose of the tree, was to give us free will. God made us with free will. Totally different conversation really about like David and stuff like that. It's that whole foreknowledge versus actual ordination, which honestly I think that's just nuance. I don't think we fully comprehend what those things mean.
Yeah, that would be a whole different
It
podcast.
would be. I mean, because
But my point in bringing those verses up is that God, I think God does ordain evil. However, the mechanics.
So you do, because earlier
yeah.
Johnny asked you, and you're like, "Well, no," and then here we have video evidence of you saying that you think God ordains evil.
Yeah, I think it's just a semantic argument at that point. What do I mean by ordaining? And
What do you mean, Ryan?
Yeah, younger Ryan would not have said that God caused evil or made evil happen, but that He allowed evil to happen.
So you're defending younger Ryan here.
Yeah, younger Ryan, he's not as good with articulating with language. And
You would
whatnot.
at least articulate it differently today than you would back then.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure there's lots of sound bites from all three of us that
Yeah,
take an
absolutely.
That,
Yeah, and the
would
whole-
condemn us as heretics.
No. So I actually, well, we'll get to that in a second. Let's finish. Yeah.
And I think ultimately I could assent to that in a different way, but like, it just, what does that really mean? I mean, like, because I really do think that God did all of this in foreknowledge, that he did all the calculations and he knew exactly how it was going to go down.
Doctor Strange.
And so, in a way, you could say God ordained evil, right? So if he
Oh, so now Johnny
calculates this
affirms
incredible
God's
domino
ordaining
chain
evil
reaction
also.
that ends in the glory of God as the waters cover the sea, he may not be tipping the 50th domino, but he tipped the first one. You know, so he did ordain it,
Yes.
but he's not responsible for it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so,
Right,
And
let's
so
make-
by
I think
no
that's-
John,
means
now,
will I
making
now
it look
you've
good
said
now.
that God ordains evil.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's when you get.
Oh,
in-
now you're trying to defend
Oh.
yourself.
No, I wouldn't.
Oh.
No, I would not say it that way either. I would not articulate it that way either anymore. I think that it is interesting though. I would have to like go around in circles because I think that's where it gets really philosophical at that point, right? Using the domino analogy, you know, he was willing to tip the first domino to have human history play out the way that it did. So, you know, what is he responsible? I don't know. You know, like that's where you really get into the I don't, you know, philosophically, what does that really mean? I don't know that we'll ever really know. I would not say in a way. I don't know that I would say that phrase ever again. In a way, God ordained evil.
Well.
No. So I recant that
All
publicly.
right, so now we're waiting for Connor to say it on this episode too.
This is why I don't talk a lot on the show. Just edit.
right.
for evil, or that evil comes from God, that God is evil, because everything that God does is for good. I think the Bible
For
makes
love.
that clear.
But if we really believe in God's sovereignty, then nobody would be able to commit acts of evil unless God sovereignly allows.
Oh boy, Connor's saying it.
You Calvinist freak.
No. I didn't say.
Apparently, love is where they're.
Yeah, whoa, that's a cop out. Number one. This really went off the rails at the end.
No, we are all guilty.
Second of all, no, hold on. I actually would stand by what I said though, because I didn't say God ordained evil. I said He allows it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a way. Yeah, that's
You're
fine.
just avoiding.
That's how all Calvinists avoid the whole sovereignty thing. But you know, avoid not. Anyway, it's okay. Don't worry about it.
I'm just saying that allows and ordains are two different words.
Yes, that is true.
One may be a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
Right.
We would live in a loveless world. It's cheesy, but I remember
Yeah, it is.
I was sitting in the living room of my grandfather's house when he was alive in Naples, and he fell asleep, and Hallmark Channel was still on, and there was this old like Hallmark Hall of Fame movie called Valley of Light, and this dude he was like living his life so that nobody could hurt him anymore and stuff like that. And
Sins of the Hallmark movie?
You might find some Valley of Light where, you know, everything's perfect, everything's fine, but I imagine it's a loveless place, right? Because he wasn't willing to let anybody in, and therefore he wouldn't have a relationship of love. And so, I guess love is worth it to people. And it's interesting that even in like a cultural thing that was completely...
That was very cheesy, John.
It is very cheesy, but even in that movie, there's this theme of, you know what? I might get hurt. I might have to be vulnerable, but I want to experience love, right? That's the value of love, and God is love, right? So, that to me is.
And I do want to re-stress that, because I did talk a lot about God's
Love,
glory,
love,
but the Bible
love.
does say
Say
God is love,
Right.
And so, in whatever God does, expresses that love.
But part of His glory is His love, and I
Yes.
think like I want to glorify God when I read this.
Tie it
That
all
He
together.
foreknew and or / ordained like everything, right? That's going to happen, and He still said, "I'm going to have to go to the cross in order for this to go to plan." But
Yeah.
I'm willing to do that.
Well, and that's why I think your answers don't really contradict each
No.
other, because at the end of the day, God loving us and knowing all that would entail, he also knew that is the thing that would bring Him the most glory. So
Now, playing the devil's advocate just for a second, right? There are some more intellectual atheists who might say, well, I would rather just not exist than have to go through this and not experience the love of God. But I think that's a person that has not experienced the Holy Spirit and understood. Because once the Holy Spirit gets involved and you understand that existence is beautiful in the end, right? I mean, Revelation 21, then all of a sudden it is worth it, you know. But you know, that's where you get into ethics and all this kind of debate about, you know, whether or not it would have been more ethical, human ethics, right, for God to just leave it be. But
Sure.
I'm glad to be alive, personally.
So honestly, I think we're actually gonna have to wait till next week to answer the other question.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
we got a full episode here, so it's good discussion. I mean, how long do you think that'll take?
I mean, I have like a
I don't want to
I want
rush
to hear
it,
me
you know
say
what I mean?
Yayit.
yeah.
Okay, I don't even remember what the other
I
question
only
was.
have a few thoughts.
I do too. I mean, where are we on time?
We're on like the 30.
You have 20 seconds left.
Oh, maybe we
Answer
should
the
wait.
question.
Yeah, I think we should wait.
We'll wait. Maybe you could throw in another question for next week as well.
Yeah, let me see what the
All
next
right,
week
guys.
was. I
Well,
don't
thank
remember.
you so much for joining us this week on Theology Thursday. Raymond, thank you for your question. It's a great question. A lot of people have that question, and I think it's worth exploring. So, Ryan, go ahead.
Yayit.
You got your you know.
Yay.
Okay, so here's any closing thoughts and your reaction to that? You guys have anything else you want to add? That you know, generally speaking, pretty much the same. Maybe could have worded some things
Yeah,
better.
I think it is all semantics. I would definitely word things differently.
Okay.
I will tell you this right now. Yeah, there was a couple things I would word differently, and I think too, like the way that my brain works is definitely different now. I don't know how you feel, but like,
Yeah, you got dumber.
yeah, exactly. No, but like when I heard when I was hearing you talk about the whole, you know, God in one passage and Satan in another passage. I know the purpose of that example was, you know, for what you're talking about, but I would have now I think about something totally different, like
Sure.
what Satan is in the Old Testament, what Satan is in the New Testament, and how that all works together. It's pretty interesting stuff.
Can we do that for one of our October episodes? Talk about Satan.
Yeah, let's talk about the
Talk
Satan.
about Satan. We're going to talk about angels and demons.
Yep.
We're talking about some spooky stuff, guys. So, yeah. Here's how I feel about how that went, because this is our first time trying to react to an episode, see how it went. I liked that.
You like that?
I thought that was kind of neat. So here's the deal. Like, if somebody sends us a question that we've already answered in the past, might as well just react to it, because I felt like overall, yeah, not much has changed. I was right. But we were able to say, oh, you know what? Because, and I think in just the nature of the show, it's a good thing for us to do, because we always clarify, we're not experts. We're not claiming to be experts. We're just students, and we want to share that journey. And so along the way, critiquing ourselves and, you know, and growing and our perspectives changing, that's all a part of that journey, right? So being able to look back and say, yeah, you know, I'm not totally there with that, or this has changed, or maybe I could have worded that better, I think is really valuable for us as well as our listeners who are joining us on this journey. So I think even if our views haven't changed that much, like if somebody asks a question I've already asked before, I'm just going to send them the episode anyway. So now they just get that with a little bit extra commentary. So I think it's totally worthwhile. You had a good idea, Ryan.
Thank you.
How do you guys feel about that? You like that?
Could I have a suggestion for the after show?
Okay, well, we can talk about that in a second, but first I'm asking, do you like
I like.
the reacting?
I like.
You got
Yeah, I'm fine with it, because I agree with the same thing. I mean,
No,
you're going to send them the episode anyway. We might as well freshen it up a bit.
Here's my policy. Because this was this year, but it was still last season, and there's still been some time that's transpired. So the policy is we just don't react to an episode that's been released in the same season that we're in.
Yeah.
Sure.
Cool. And then, like, 3 years from now, we'll react to us reacting to this. No.
Reactception.
What's your idea for the after show, though?
Could we react to episode 1?
You want to react to the very first episode?
Yeah.
Johnny wasn't even in that episode.
I know.
Well, that may work out, because I kind of I really am like running low on time, because I got to go get lunch for my family. So you guys
you're
could
gonna
just
leave us?
Well, I wouldn't have to if it was like a shorter after show. But if you're gonna react to a full episode, but it's just you two in the episode, it might make more sense for you.
No, I want you to react, because
We don't have to do the whole episode.
The thing about the fact that you know.
Oh my goodness, it's 42 minutes.
We're not gonna react the whole thing.
So maybe we'll do that. Maybe I don't know. So thank
I
you
could
guys.
just make fun of you guys. That's
Yeah, and we could make fun of you.
I'm not in the episode.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We
but,
say how
but we'll
dumb
just
Johnny
make
was,
fun of
he
you
wasn't in
anyway.
our episode.
I think we should have Johnny react to every episode that he hasn't been in, since he doesn't listen to them. Just force him to react to them. Just make the new after show. This Theology Thursday Reacts. Cool. Well, I have a question for these guys. I'm going to throw totally off the cuff. Very deep theological question I've been processing lately, and I'm going to ask them on the after show, and it's going to get spicy. So, I encourage you to join us. Ryan, go ahead and do the thing.
Yeah, eat.